If you can laugh at what happened later on, you can get through this. You can be a survivor. You can be a thriver. You can be an advocate. Hang in there.
Life Reimagined with Stacey Ray.
Hi, and welcome to Life Reimagined, where we dive into stories of reinvention, resilience, and empowerment. Today, I am so honored to welcome Debby Montgomery Johnson. She's an Air Force veteran who served as an intelligence officer, an entrepreneur, and an advocate for victims of online financial fraud. After experiencing a devastating romance scam, Debby turned her trauma into triumph. She wrote the book, The Woman Behind the Smile, founded a nonprofit, and now leads efforts to educate and support those who have faced similar situations. She's been featured on major media outlets, including The Dr. Oz Show, CBS This Morning, The Mel Robbins Show, and many more. Today, she is the chair of the esteemed Society of Citizens Against Relationship Scams, otherwise known as SCARS, and I am thrilled to welcome her to our show. Hey, Debby.
Thank you so much for having me. It's really important. I can't do this by myself, and I really appreciate everybody that will help us spread the word.
So, you actually have a really quite fascinating background, from the Air Force to entrepreneurship. Tell me a little about that.
Well, it's 60 something years of experience. And when I was young, I had always wanted to be a lawyer. I went to paralegal school, worked for some attorneys in Denver. And then my brother and friends were in the Air Force. And I was like, well, that's kind of an interesting thing. And I was able to go to the recruiter and I was selected for Air Force intelligence. So after I went to college, I went through officer training school and joined the Air Force as an intelligence officer. Did that for 8 years, 10 years and met my late husband. I met him there, and we have had 4 children, 4 grandchildren. And in that process of the Air Force, I did that for years, and actually was over in Germany when the wall went down in East Berlin. That was
Wow,
quite
what was
fascinating.
that like to experience that?
It was actually the one of the most scary times in my life. Actually, had gone into East Berlin on a they had great shopping, which is interesting. We went in, but I was in my Air Force uniform, and we had to give our identification cards through this blocked off window and little it's the spy stuff, right? So you give them your ID cards, and I knew the Russians and the East Germans were on the other side, but we couldn't see them; they could see us. And they
Oh,
watched us the whole time we were there, and so you would shop and then put stuff in a car so that they couldn't see what you were buying. It was a very interesting, weird experience, but a good lesson in what life is like outside the United States.
yeah,
And,
yeah.
so that was fascinating. We were in Germany for 3.5 years. One of my boys was born over there, and I came back, worked at the Pentagon for a while at the Defense Intelligence Agency, and, had an extraordinary career, but I also was pregnant with my 3rd child and decided at that point it was time for me to go home and raise my family. So
Uh-huh. And so you've been in banking, and I know that your husband started a company for supplements for neuropathy. Is that right?
correct. In 2002, Lou had diabetes. Was under control, but he had terrible neuropathy, sciatica, and he wanted something different than the regular insulin and gabapentin and all those things. So he was an entrepreneur at heart, and he found this vitamin supplement called benfotiamine, which is a fat soluble form of vitamin B1. And it's very effective in alleviating or reducing the pain of neuropathy, the symptoms of sciatica. We've been in business. Lou died in 2010, and I got thrown into running the company back then, which was an interesting thing too, because I don't have diabetes or neuropathy, and to take that company on as my own has been a process.
So I know that in 2010 you got a call that was earth-shattering. And, while I'm a widow, I had 10 months to prepare for that. I can't even imagine the shock and devastation of getting a call like that and from your son, correct?
I was at a meeting. I was working with the school board at that time, and I was in a meeting, had my phone off, and when I came to on a break, I had like 10 or 12 messages on my phone, and the first one that I picked up was from my oldest son, and that was the call, and he that's when he said, "Mom, Dad just died. I'm coming home to take care of everything." And that was my 23-year-old son who was in flight training for the Navy. He's a Marine Corps pilot now. And he was up in Pensacola and he was going to come home. His dad had left the night before, a Wednesday night, on a routine, job thing. He was going over to the west coast of Florida. And that morning, apparently, he woke up and went downstairs to breakfast and looked at the man beside him and said, there's my truck. Here are my keys. Here's my bags. Call 911. I'm having a heart attack.
Oh dear.
And he was a half an hour he did in a half an hour. He was just a few minutes from a hospital on the west coast of Florida, and he had a sudden heart attack and was gone. Um, it was an extraordinary time. My mom and dad lived 30 minutes away from where he was, and so they were the ones that were actually got the second call, and they went over and took care of everything on the West Coast. But that just completely changed my family's life in an instant because Lou hadn't been sick. His diabetes was under control, and he had literally just walked out the door on Wednesday night, and Thursday morning he was gone. So, and I never saw him after he left Wednesday night. I never saw him after that. So it was very going back to my military experience then, it was almost as if he had gone on what we call TDY, which is temporary duty. He had left the house, said goodbye, and then I'll
Mhm.
see you later,
Right,
and just never came back and never called.
right.
And that was it's very unsettling, as you can imagine.
Uh, I can only imagine. My husband was also retired military,
Oh, good.
so thank you for your service to both you and your husband and your children.
Thank you.
The shock combined with what's supposed to be a grieving process is a whole different dynamic, I would imagine, because now you find yourself having to run a business that you know
Mhm.
nothing about.
And it paid the bills. I mean, my job at the school board was really for benefits for insurance.
Yeah,
And, I left a very high-paying job at commercial banking because of the stress and had gone to the school specifically for the benefits because Lou's company was doing very well. I had only sat with him moments, to listen to what he was doing, but I was never a part of it. It didn't resonate with me. Like I said, I didn't have diabetes, I didn't have neuropathy, but I
right.
knew who his contacts were. I knew who his largest customers and clients were. So fortunately, with the background I had in banking and law and all that kind of thing, I was able to use the resources to figure out how to run the company. And I pulled in his friends and I said, "You guys sat here all the time with him and you heard things. How do I do this?"
Right.
I called his clients and I'm like, "This is what happened, and can you please help me?" It was frightening, but I had to do it because, like I said, it paid the bills. You learn a lot when you have to do something, and I only ran out of product once, and I will never do that again.
That'll never happen again. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So, how did you go from losing your husband, taking on a business that you are now the CEO and responsible for? How did that lead you into online dating?
Well, it was not my choice originally, it was my girlfriend's. After about 6 months, I was still working my day job at the school, I was running the company. I was literally except for 4 hours at night when I would hop into bed and that would be the only time that I could grieve
Yeah.
because I was alone. And actually, you might understand this too, I really got mad at Lou for dying
Oh,
because
I absolutely
yeah,
understand
it
that.
changes your life, and I wasn't expecting it, and even the silly things like passwords on the computer, he hadn't written them down. So I was guessing. And, so after about 6 months, my friends knew I was exhausted, and they said, "Look, you have to get a life. You have to do something more than just work." And to them, it meant dating. To me, it was very scary because I'd been married for almost 26 years, and to go back into that dating realm was frightening because all those when you're 16, the not enoughs, not pretty enough, smart enough, skinny enough, all those
Right.
not enoughs come into play. And I had to really scold myself saying, "Come on, you're very accomplished. You can do this." And I did it very gingerly.
And you were how old
I
when
was
your husband
52. I was
died?
52.
Your friends said that to you. I know that when my husband died, he was buried at Arlington.
Oh, great.
And
Thank
so
you.
we had to wait 3 months before, he could be buried there due to weather and what have you. But I still remember right after the service, one of our friends, a male friend, came up to me and said, Mike would not want you to be alone. You
Yeah.
really need to get back out there. And I just looked at him and I was so stunned. And I said, I literally just buried my husband 20 minutes ago. Are you kidding me? Like, I know people mean well, but that's really not helpful. It's like, no. So with your friends, the kind of the peer pressure of, okay, I got to get back out there. And did you actually feel you were ready, or did you feel like you were doing that more for, okay, maybe my friends are right. Maybe that's what I should do.
Well, that's the shoulda, coulda, wouldas. It's interesting that your husband's friend said that too, because I remember one of Lou's best friends called me up and said, "Who are you now?" Because I'd been Lou's wife, I'd been the kid's
Right.
mother, I had all these roles in my life,
Yeah.
but who was I? And because I was thrown into running his company, now it was still his company. I had to find out who I was, and I wasn't sure. So it was a little bit exciting to even attempt it, but very daunting. And
Yes.
I didn't do it lightly, and they kind of pushed me through it, but they pushed me alone. I didn't have a buddy. I didn't have someone to help me out. So navigating this world of online dating, although it seemed fun, and I reached out to friends that had actually met their spouses through online dating. I went to very safe places, I thought, faith-based places where I figured people would have the
Yeah.
same feelings and trust that I had. When I did it though, I wanted to be perfect. I wanted it to look perfect. That's the whole woman behind the smile thing. I didn't want anybody to see my cracks, so I put together a really good profile, and I don't think I put anything in there that would make me look terribly vulnerable. Like, you don't put down that you're a widow
Right.
and that kind of
Right.
stuff. That just is a flash in the pan.
Yeah.
But for me, it was, I wanted to make sure that everybody knew that I was educated, that I could write well, that I could, run the things. But
Yeah.
I wanted it to look just right, the right
Right.
pictures. And I was really floored. I don't know if you ever got onto online dating at all, but I was just taken back by the pictures of the men 55 to 65.
Yeah.
And they showed up in the what I call the wife beater T-shirts
Uh-huh. Or no shirt at
or no
all.
shirt, and the motorcycles, nothing against motorcycles, but it just
Right.
wasn't my thing.
Right.
And other women hanging on 'em, I'm like, "Oh my gosh."
Yeah.
My husband had been an Air Force briefer at the Pentagon, and I'm thinking, "He was brilliant. What am I doing?" And, then I lit upon a very handsome British contractor.
Okay.
And he was smart and was a widower, which I found interesting too, that the widowers were a little bit safer, if you can say that, because they
Yeah.
didn't come with the baggage of having an ex-husband, former spouse. Um,
And also we think they can relate to us.
exactly,
Right.
which was part of the story because, when this happened, we talked a lot about that because I wanted to know what was the experience like losing your wife, because here it is losing my husband. So I was looking for that, and it was safe, and it was fun. We were on a dating site, and like I said, it was safe. So we thought it took some time because you were writing on the dating site, and it was almost like an email. It would go back and forth. So there
Yeah.
was a little bit of time. And I remember one of the first emails I got from him was very articulate, very well written, and the pictures were lovely. But at the end of one of the paragraphs, he said, "You can call me Eric Cole." And I thought that was a very strange way of saying my name is.
Yeah.
And so I called him on it, and he's like, "Well, that's Francolingua, and, I'm from Europe, and this is what we said." And I'm like,
Oh,
"Oh, that just played right into the whole story."
sure.
You know? So here I had this international businessman, and he was good looking and whatever. The story had it that he was originally in Houston, and that he was working in Houston, but he had just gotten a job in the Far East, in
Ah,
in Malaysia, and so he's gonna be leaving the United States to go to Malaysia for a while, and he was a contractor, an independent contractor for a hardwood tree company. So,
okay.
most people wouldn't understand that, but I actually had, investments in trees in Costa Rica
Oh,
that Lou had bought years and years ago. I never talked about it. So he didn't know that I had investments there. But because of that, I was able to understand, I thought, what he was doing. And I actually, my intel hat kicked in, and I actually contacted the company that he said he worked for because they had a fabulous website. And so I went on there and I called them and I said, "Do you happen to have an employee or contractor named Eric Cole?" And they said, "Well, no." I said, "Okay, first step." I asked him about it and he said, "Well, I don't work for them. I'm independent." So I'm thinking, okay, I have a company.
Yeah,
I have independence. You wouldn't find them on my books.
sure.
And so every time I checked something, there was always a plausible reason why I was maybe getting a no. But it was an exciting adventure because for the first time in 20 something years, not the first time, but
Yeah,
you understand it. Someone was validating me as an individual, not as someone's mother, someone's wife, but me as a woman. And that felt really nice.
I
And
imagine so.
it went a little bit quicker than I thought. Looking back, I think that was one of the things that made me a little uncomfortable at first was how quickly it moved into, how much he adored me, how much he was starting to fall in love with me and all this. Well, again, once you get past the initial, whoa, slow down, I've been married a long time. And I'd gotten into online dating rather than in person dating because I thought it was a little bit safer for me. I wasn't ready
Right.
for an in person experience yet. In the end, I have 4,000 pages of journal because I kept a record of everything we said to each other.
That is mind blowing to me
Yeah.
because I can't find the email I sent so and so yesterday morning, and I have to ask for help. Like, how am I going to find this email? To have 4,000 pages of these journals. My goodness.
And this was back in 2010 to 2012. So I had an online journal and I would just copy and paste every email, every chat, because we moved from the dating site when he went overseas to Yahoo Chat, which I thought was phenomenal at the time. It was
Right.
this high tech instant messaging type of a thing. And
Sure.
so I would copy all those and I would put it in my journal thinking, this is really fun. I'm creating family history. The kids will understand what happened here. And it was an incredible experience, and then in the times we weren't talking, I could go back and look at what we'd said, and it was kind of fun to see all that, and
Right.
turned out to be 4,000 pages of evidence which nobody could use,
Right.
but it was really an extraordinary experience, and that whole Yahoo chat thing was fun, but in the middle of the night when I would be sleeping, I would hear that ding, ding, ding of
Yeah.
the Yahoo chat,
And
and
you
it was
get
like a Pavlov's
excited.
dog. I bolted out of bed and I ran to
Yeah.
my computer and the endorphins were going and we would type for hours and in the middle of the night. And then I would get up and I'd go to my job. you
You
know,
remind me of the what was it? You've Got Mail when Tom
exactly.
Hanks and Meg Ryan are like, "Oh my gosh, ding ding,
Exactly.
you've got mail."
That's what it was. But Yahoo chat, it was instant messaging. So we were, it was timely. And that was really fun
Yeah.
for the most part. Um,
Yes.
but what I didn't really understand too is how quickly, now 2020 hindsight, right? How quickly you move into different categories, how quickly the relationship goes online. And part of that I think is because for me anyway, I was able to really open up to him in writing much faster than I would have if I was talking to
If you
him.
were talking face to face,
Yeah,
yeah.
so I was telling him stuff about the family and about the business and it was kind of a business growing relationship too because he would ask me about my company and could I help him with a business plan and how do I do this and how do I do that and then he would we would bounce ideas off of each other which was great because I was now alone running my company. So he was kind of this confidant and in the process I would get to know him and I got to know his sister and his son. This whole Yahoo messaging. I would have a message board open with Mary, his sister, and I'd be asking her questions about him and then him questions about her because she had lost her husband too. And so Mary and Kenny, his son, became a part of my life, as did his attorney. So it's not just one person, it's multiple people now. And I was getting pictures of their home and they knew how I love family and I love Christmas because it was right before Christmas when this started. And I recall seeing pictures of their Christmas tree and just this whole story was built upon my life and their lives, and it was very integral. So he very quickly became part of my life, very quickly.
Were your kids aware at this stage that you were communicating with him?
Yes, at the beginning. And actually, when I first started talking to him, was right around Thanksgiving. My mom and dad were here. And so I was here, I was thinking, I was talking to this handsome Brit. I was telling him all about Thanksgiving, and my mom was in the kitchen doing the turkey, and my dad was outside getting the Christmas decorations out. So I was all day long, we were on Yahoo Chat. I was explaining to him about American holidays, and that was so much fun. So my folks knew from the very get go. And I actually went to my mom because I felt if anybody was gonna be the most skeptical, it would be her. And she said, "Oh, one of my 70-something-year-old friends met her husband on a dating site, and the only thing I want you to be careful with is when you go to see him the first time, have a friend that's there or
Yeah,
have somebody
yeah.
know that where you are, so in case
Right,
something happens." But my mom was all in.
right.
Now, my brothers, on the other hand, I have 3 brothers. I'd gone to Virginia for the holidays, and it was like the Inquisition. They
Oh, yeah.
they put me on one side of the room, my sister-in-laws were with me on the other side, and they were just pelting questions. "Who is this guy? We have to do a background check. What kind of business person is he?" And I'm like,
Oh, I
"Good."
have one of those brothers, and trust me, nothing would get by him
You just wanna shut him off, though.
ever. Yeah,
I'm like,
I know. And I would, and sometimes we do have those conversations even about business. And I'm like, can you stop being so suspicious? Can you, like that kind of thing. And then I have to like step back and go, wait, I get it. He's trying to protect me, but
right,
I'm a
but
big girl and I have my own mind and yeah.
my kids did that. They were like, "Don't, don't, don't." And as soon as they said that, I'm like, "Whoa, I'm the adult here, leave me alone." And I really stopped talking to them at that point because I'm like, "I
Ah,
don't need your pushback. This is fun for me."
right,
And that's part of the story too, is that if you get isolated, they only want you to talk to them.
right.
And I really didn't talk to my kids about what was going on. I didn't My
Yeah.
parents kind of knew he was supposed to come to visit, and we were all gonna go over to mom and dad, so they were part of it. They knew what was going on. They didn't know what I was doing financially, but they knew about talking to him, and they knew about the story, and they knew about his family and all that kind of stuff.
So the financial stuff, when did that start?
That started looking back very quickly. But originally, I had this friend who's an engineer and he's overseas. He can't get onto the dating site. Would you mind sending a check into the dating site? I was like, sure, no problem. Because again, goes back to the men that I saw was limited. So I was thinking,
Right,
it'd be great to have another, you know, international engineer online.
right.
So I sent a check to the dating site, which actually validated his membership to the dating site.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah, you wanna do that.
Yeah,
The next thing was we were again talking business, so power of attorneys. He was essentially gonna come here to the States. He was gonna get paid quite a lot of money at the end of the job, which as a business person, I also understood that sometimes you don't get paid until the job's
correct.
done. So that made sense to me. We had to set up, accounts here in the States. He wanted me to have power of attorney so I could do that. Power of attorney was an international one, which I knew how to do them, here in the States, and they were not expensive. They were pretty quick, but we were working through his attorney and they needed me to help them. So that was the first tiff we had, if you could call it a tiff. Because I go back to being that Vermonter. I'm that damn Yankee that doesn't give money away to just anybody.
Right.
And so when he was asking me to help him out with his power of attorney, part of me was like, "Ugh." And then when he asked me to do it through Western Union, I'm thinking as a former banker going, "Ooh,"
Yeah.
I'd never done
Yeah.
that. Um, but it convinced me to let's just do this. The sooner we can get this done, the sooner I can get there. And that was the whole premise is the sooner we can get this done, the faster I get to you, the faster we're together as a family. We can be together for the holidays, yada, yada,
Right.
yada. So I did the Western Union thing and I got a little bit of pushback only because Western Union's gotten in trouble and had this huge settlement after this happened to me. But I wasn't sending it to him. I was sending it to another fella that was a friend of his in Kuala Lumpur because he
Right.
was there. But he goes, I questioned that. Why am I not sending it to you? He said, because my friend is there. They know him. He can get the money quickly for me. And always a plausible excuse, reason
Right.
why it would work.
Right.
And I did it, in spite of the person at the grocery store saying, "Do you know this person? Is this your friend?" At that point, yeah, it's my boyfriend.
Well, and it kind of lined up because he said he had this job in Malaysia, and this
Oh,
guy's
yeah.
in his friend is in Kuala Lumpur.
Yep.
Yeah,
Very involved.
yeah,
And yeah, so it went on from there, and it was in small increments, but together. And this is, I didn't do it alone. I always had his sister as my counterpart. And whatever was asked to do, Mary was doing it. That's
oh,
part of it, because if you know you're not the only one doing something, you're a little more willing to do it.
right,
So if she was selling some of her jewelry or doing whatever with her jewelry, I was doing it. If I was selling some of my investments, so was she. I always had someone that was my partner, not
right.
partner in crime, no, but my partner. And we always had the promise that it was going to come back. It was going to come back to us. This is just a short period of time. And the only time that I really got a little worried about it was when I had one of my investment accounts. It was a retirement account, actually.
Yeah.
You can only take it out for a certain amount of time.
Oh, right. And you have to put it back in with
You got to
that.
put it back in within 90 days or whatever, or
Right,
you're going to get penalized. And so I
right.
told him, I'm like, I can only take a loan here. I cannot, do this and then not get it paid back because it's a financial hit for me. I promise, I promise, I promise. I'll get it back to you. I promise. So I believed him. I had no reason not to trust him. At least that's what I thought back then. And so I turned in some of my retirement accounts. I sold some of my trees down in Costa Rica. I sold some silver. I came up with the money because I felt like he was my family and I would do anything for my family.
That makes sense to me, especially as you're building this relationship, the hopefulness and the almost, I'm going to guess, maybe even the giddiness at having this new relationship and wow, this is, going to transform my life. And then interspersed in there is the money.
Yeah.
Do you want to share the number?
Yeah. Well, the first thing that, as you're talking about this whole endorphin thing, it's the brain function. It's called the amygdala hijack.
Yeah,
There's so many endorphins and hormones in it's your brain. And I always tease that it was always my heart led my head. Well, it did. Because, he had my heart at that point because we were developing this relationship. Now, the money came in over 2 years. It wasn't all at one time. It was a progression over 2 years. And although I had meticulous records, I had a binder that had
right.
meticulous records. I didn't keep the total until the very end. And
Oh boy.
it was $1 million. It was $1,080,762.
Wow.
I can always hear audiences go, I didn't have $1 million, but I
Yeah.
found it. I was very creative in finding it.
Hold that thought. We'll be right back after this message.
Ready to trade ordinary for extraordinary? At Sisterhood Travels, we turn bucket lists into unforgettable adventures with group travel specifically for women 45 and up. Picture yourself exploring vibrant cultures and making lifelong friends along the way. Join our community of fearless women and start your next chapter full of joy, discovery, and sisterhood. Visit sisterhoodtravels.com and say yes to your next adventure.
Let's dive right back in. Here we go. So, how did you learn that this was a scam?
Okay. It was on Yahoo Chat early in the morning on September 10th, 2012. And he came online that morning and started it off saying, Deb, how do you feel about forgiveness? Well, all those years we've been, it's 2 years now. We've been talking spiritually about things, family wise and whatever. So I put on my spiritual hat and we started talking about forgiveness. Got disconnected, which wasn't unusual because he was over in the Far East. And I went swimming. I came back and he comes back on and he says, you remember what we talked about this morning? I said, yeah, forgiveness. We went back into it. And I looked at the screen. I was looking at what I was writing and I said, why are we talking about forgiveness? Have I done something? Me.
Mm-hmm.
Have I done something?
Always self-blame.
Yeah.
Right.
And he goes, no, I have something to tell you and it's going to hurt you. And I'm like, well, you don't have to do that. He goes, no, I have a confession. And when I heard that, that was like a gut punch to me because I had heard that once in my marriage and it didn't turn out to be very happy. And so I'm like, "Oh my gosh," you he goes, "I have to confess that this has all been a scam." At which I'm thinking, "Oh my gosh, you're sick, something's happened, what's wrong here? This is it's what about Kenny? What about Mary? What about your attorney? What about the money?" He goes, "No, I have to tell you that this has all been a scam, and there is no Kenny, there's no Mary, there's no." And I was like, "I don't believe it, you have to prove it to me."
Right.
Well, the only proof, because for 2 years he told me he couldn't come on live, he said, "On Yahoo Chat, there's a small camera function, and I'm going to come on live." I'm like, "Are you kidding? For 2 years I've asked you about this?" And he walked me through it, and on my screen, I have dual screens for my computers. I was looking at my handsome Brit, expecting to see my handsome Brit. And then this small camera popped up in the corner of my computer is this dark-haired, dark-eyed, dark-skinned young man with a huge smile on his face. And for me, it was like hitting a brick wall.
Oh my gosh.
And he's like, "I'm so glad to see you, and I'm so sorry," and yada, yada, yada. And in the middle of that, he goes, "Can we keep this going?" And I'm
What?
thinking, "Are you out of your freaking mind?" I said, No, I don't think so." And the only thing that I did, and I don't know how I did this, is I had my telephone beside me and I took a picture of my screen.
Oh, how smart were you? Yeah.
It's the only picture that I have of him. And I ended up writing a book later on and I put it in my book. And because at that moment it was my gift from God that said, "Okay, here's the truth. Here's the story. Here's your brain, here's your heart. Separate." And I was able to clearly see now what it was going on. In my head, I'm thinking, how can I catch him? I've watched enough FBI shows that if I keep him engaged, we can catch him. I didn't tell him that,
Right.
because he's like, "Well, I know you can turn me in and I hope you don't because I do have my siblings." And the story was going on. And maybe that's part of the truth because a lot of fellas over there have lost their parents and they are raising siblings and they do this because they need the money. So the story goes. But I was like, how can I keep him engaged? Because now I have my journals, 4,000 pages. I have all my financial records, and I know that the FBI is here in Palm Beach County. After we said goodbye that day, I knew that I would continue communicating with him for a period of time because I
Yeah.
wanted to see how we could catch him. Called my parents immediately because you can imagine I'm just totally devastated at that point. That 2 years of my life have been ripped out from underneath me. I've lost over $1 million, and now what do I do? Looking back, I'm really grateful that he did what he did because go back to the story of my husband dying. When Lou left, I never saw him again. If this Eric or his name was Joseph, if Joseph had left, just disappeared, it would have been like Lou dying again. And now I'm $1 million, out of my bank accounts and financial accounts. So that was my closure moment for him. But it was also my, how do I catch him? How do I move on from that moment? And I was able to go to the FBI the next day with my parents and sit down with them. And I told them what had happened. And the first thing they told me was, "Is he in the United States?" I said, "No." "Well, there's nothing we can do. If he's out of the country, there's nothing we can do." Now, all my family members who are pilots were ready to fly to
Yes.
Nigeria to get him. But there was nothing the FBI could do unless he was here in the States. And when I heard that, I shut down. I looked at my mom and dad and came home. I'm like, I'm not ever telling this story again. I just have to figure out how I'm going to keep going.
So that's a really provocative thought to me that, first you jump out and you say, "Oh no, hell no, you're not doing this to me. I'm going to the FBI." The FBI says we can't help. And then you're just, "I'm done. Can't talk about this. I'm going to have to find a way to move on."
It's so embarrassing. And, for someone that was in the financial services business to have lost that much money, I blame myself. And the forgiveness, the whole forgiveness of him, that actually was easier forgiving him than forgiving myself
Why do you think that is?
because you blame yourself. Nobody needs to blame me for what I did. And that's another part of this whole story is the victim blame is huge from
Yes.
outsiders. And that shuts you down because if you can't even go to your best friend or your family members and say, "This is what happened to me. I was a victim of this." They're like, "Well, you did it yourself." Yes, I did. But the only thing that I did wrong was
Right.
say hello. I said, hello. If the world knew how expert these criminals are in the psychology of the scam, the manipulation, the whole gaslighting, the brain, it is so involved. And I've learned so much over the years working with the organization I do, SCARS, the Society of Citizens Against Relationship Scam. But I didn't know it at the time. And so here I was, still grieving Lou, because now I'm grieving a second one and
Yeah.
the finances. And I'm going, how in the world could I have not seen the red flags? For me, I always classify them as the pink flags
The pink
because
flag.
I felt them, but then I would ask the question. I would, I
And
Googled,
satisfy yourself with that answer.
I even, as a former imagery analyst, I Googled the picture. I looked at the addresses he gave me and I looked them up and I analyzed them. I said, could this be the home? Could this be, the business? Is this the hotel he's in Hong Kong? I used so many of my resources to try to verify who he was. I remember sending a package to a hotel in Hong Kong. It was a goodie package. It got sent back to me. And I'm like, why did that happen? A letter that I sent to his son for his birthday, it got returned to me. I'm like, Eric, why are these things happening? Always had an answer. And so even though I did what I felt was my due diligence in trying to figure out who he was, there was always a reason why I got the no and why it came back. I just couldn't understand how I could do that. Me, that very frugal person who loved family. That's the only thing I can go back to, is that he became part of my family. Even though I didn't see him physically,
Mm-hmm.
I knew, I thought, who this person was. After 2 years of everyday conversation, I mean, you and I could be best friends in an hour
Exactly.
just by having these conversations and asking questions and getting answers and trusting that what you're hearing is the truth.
It's the truth.
And that's the thing, is I started to not even trust myself, because I was like, how can I believe anything anybody says to me now? And as a 52-year-old, 54-year-old at that point, I I grew up learning to trust. You stranger danger when you're 2. But then later on, your parents are having you shake someone's hand saying, meet Joe, Joe Schmo.
Right.
And I trusted them. I trusted people. I worked with people. You work with people that you know, love, and trust. After 2 years, I thought I knew this fellow.
And I'm sure that you also grew up at a time like I did where, my dad would tell me all the time, there's nothing worth more than a man's handshake.
Absolutely.
Your word is all you've got. That's your currency.
And when
So,
my brother said, do a background check, why? This is just dating. Why would I do that? I
right,
would surely do it today.
of
But
course.
back then, why? I want to have an open, trusting relationship with this person. I put myself out there and really opened up my heart. And that's the hardest thing, is that my heart got ripped out. You know, the money's something else. And I said, look, if you'd been honest with me from the very get-go, I'm a very kind person. I
You
might have
might have
helped you out.
even given him some money.
Not
Yeah,
to a tune of $1 million, but I
right,
might have given him a little to help a sibling out. I'm not,
right.
but because it was 2 years of lying, that just cut me to the core. And it's very hard to say, it's okay, Deb, you made a mistake. It was a misstep. Move on. It's hard to do that alone.
So I guess my question is from just a human standpoint, because I know what my inclination is in any situation where I feel pushed or against the wall. How do you not let yourself go down the abyss of seeking retribution, vigilantism, and just saying, okay, wait a minute. It's not about him, it's about me. What do I need to recover?
The first thing is, when I was with the FBI and they called me a victim, I didn't like that. I was not going to be a victim. I've had a lot of things happen to me in my life, and being a victim was one of them, but it was not going to define me. And I'm like, I cannot carry that as my mantle,
Yeah, I would actually call you a survivor of an
I am now.
online. Yeah,
Yeah. And that's the word we
yeah,
use. And I get
right.
people away from that, because there are victims that go into that vigilantism and they are posting pictures of scammers online and they're trying to, go after them, and they get angry and they will never recover because they're so angry. And so the thing that helped me actually was a little bit after the reveal, as I call it. I
Right.
was at a women's meeting and I was having lunch with 3 or 4 of my friends, and somebody mentioned online dating. And I rolled my eyes at her. This is her story. And she said, "What's that about?" And I said, "Guys, I got to tell you something, but no, not leaving this table." And I told them the story. And when I was done, they say, "You have to tell this story." I'm like, "Oh no, no." And one girl said, "My mother was taken for $80,000 and never told."
Oh
Another
boy.
girl, "I was in a Ponzi scheme not once but twice and never told." Another
Right.
one, "I was engaged to this person and found out he had another family. Never said anything." And I'm like, "Oh my gosh, I have all these wonderful, brilliant entrepreneurial women, and these things are happening to us and no one is speaking
No
up.
one's talking about it.
And we can't help each other if we don't know it's happening."
But it is, I mean, wouldn't you say it is because not only of the self blame and self shame, but also other people's reaction to it, right? I've heard more people say, and certainly with judgment, you hear all these stories that are sensationalized and you go, well, that would never happen to me. Listen, I'm talking to Debbie Montgomery Johnson, an Air Force intelligence officer, an entrepreneur, a very smart, educated woman who just wanted to find love. And it could happen to any of us.
It could happen to your mother, your father, your child, your best friend,
Right.
anybody. I mean, I've worked with so many women in the past 6 or 8 years that even a dollar's too much to lose. $1,000,000 is awful. I have a woman, a friend out in Texas. She worked her whole life. She lost 2.5 million. Now, you say, how could you, a smart woman, lose this? It has nothing to do with how old you are, what color you are,
Right.
what religion you are. It's, do you have a willing heart? Do you have a good heart? And it can happen to anybody at any time. And we're seeing it happening to teenagers who don't have the money, but they have access to their parents' credit cards.
Oh, wow.
And we see it with 80-year-olds.
Right.
Typically, it's, a little over 50 to 60 because they know that we've worked hard. We've accumulated some finances.
Yeah.
We might have been divorced, we might have been widowed, but there's a time, and we're not desperate. We love people. We love relationships, we love family. And that's exactly who they're going after. And it could be a man, it could be a woman, it could be somebody married. I mean, this is what I've found over the years too, is it's not just dating sites, it's words with friends. It's any social media
Oh, my
platform.
goodness. Yeah.
It's Facebook. You get a friend request. I'm in
Oh,
multiple women entrepreneur groups, and I
right.
get these friend requests. I'm looking at it going, there's a mutual friend here, but I'm getting that spidey sense, right? There's something weird here.
Oh, yeah.
And it could be a man posing as a woman that wants to get into a women's group because they know that, oh, group of willing 50, 60-year-old
Yeah.
entrepreneurs. They're very crafty. And it's not Eric Cole. It is organized crime. They work in groups. They're educated. He wrote well because they're very well educated, many of them. It's not the old Yahoo boys that we used to hear about that, in the little cafes in Nigeria.
Yeah.
These are
Yeah.
very skilled young people. So, how would you know if you're involved in a fraud? If you have not seen the person that you are talking with online in 2 weeks, very possible it's a fraud. If you look at the profile and it looks too good to be true, my number one is if he said he's a widower or he's single, be careful. Double check the pictures. You can do a Google's reverse search many times on the pictures. They're getting better about hiding that, but Google that picture and see if it pops up on multiple like scam alerts. If they ask you for money, don't ever send money. I mean, that's a given, and if you do it the first time, you're going to keep doing it. So don't even do it the first time. Get that dating buddy, that objective person to say, "Hey, this is feeling kind of funky. Call me. I'll tell you." Just be really aware. Watch out for friend requests. If someone has a mutual friend, call up your friend and say,
Yeah.
"Hey, do you know this person?" If not, then say, "You might want to block this," and then go delete that profile or report it as a scam. Be careful on any social media that you're on, and particularly with pictures. Privatize your pictures. If you feel that someone is compromising you, report it. report them to the social media, report it to a dating site. With the advent of AI, you've got to be very careful because you
Yes.
see somebody and you think that you're talking to them and you may not be. So then be very discriminating on who and where, and meet them in person within 2 weeks if you're actually doing that. When I first went out and started talking about this, I remember the women's group, and there was one woman in the front row, and she just gave me the stink eye. Like, gosh, that was
Oh,
really
yeah.
stupid of you. And I'm thinking, oh my gosh, I can't talk about this anymore. Until I looked at the woman beside her who was bobbing her head up and down, and I knew that my story resonated with her because either it happened to her or she knew somebody had happened
Yeah.
to. And that's when I realized it wasn't about me. It was about who was around me that was going through this, and I didn't want them to go through it alone.
Was that the start of healing for you?
Oh, big time. Big time. And the more I spoke about it, the stronger I got because I realized it wasn't my fault. I did this. Yes, I take responsibility. And the people this has happened to that don't take responsibility and blame everybody else, they'll never recover it. They'll never get over it. And it's devastating. You can imagine a 60, 70, 80-year-old that this has happened to.
Right.
They blow through their finances. They might have sold their home to get more money. They might have sold everything they have. They have nowhere to go. They go into a complete depression. It leads to suicide in many cases. They've lost their family, their friends, their houses. It's devastating. And it affects the community. It's not just a family thing. Now it's your friends and the people around you. It affects the bankers and the law enforcement. Everybody
Yeah.
gets sucked into these stories. And we have to get past well, that was stupid of you, and I hate that word, because it could have happened to anybody. And in my story, I was a bank manager. I knew the managers I was working with at the bank. They all got pulled into the story. My accountant got pulled into it. Everybody was rooting for me to get him here so that
Right.
we could start our family, our life together. And when it all fell apart, it's like, the bank can't help you now. That was your fault. I was like, seriously? I was like,
Yeah.
how do they open these accounts with, fake stuff? How do you guys not see this? Where was the security folks, the fraud department? Why wasn't anybody looking at my accounts to see that I hadn't in my lifetime, except for buying a house, wire transferred any money anywhere?
Right.
Were there no red flags to you guys? And that's what when I speak to bankers today, financial crime experts, I'm like, look at the transactions.
Yeah.
And then be kind. Let the tellers, the first line people, listen to the stories and be aware that this is happening. It's changing, but don't blame the victim. Don't freeze their accounts with no other way for them to do financial transactions
Correct.
because they're stuck.
So, with your family, I'm real curious about this because I would think that for all the men and women who do go through this, family is such a big thing, especially children. Children who think they're adults and know something of the world, especially. How does the relationship change with your children? Do you find that children stop trusting the mental acuity and prowess of their parents, or what happens with that?
It's a revolving, it's a work in progress. Originally, my older boys just became unglued because they were military, they had security clearances, they were coming up and they're like, "Mom, what are we gonna do?" I said, "Look, I had security clearances when I was your age too. I went to the FBI. I did not willingly give money to a Nigerian national knowing who he was. So don't you worry about it." Now, what I found out too is because my oldest son heard about this story through a podcast that I had sent to his wife.
Ah,
Because most times you don't wanna tell your kids. You're very and you don't want to
right.
because even as a banker, I could see kids come in that thought they had inheritances and
Sure.
didn't have access to it and would get really angry. So, I had to have them realize that I wasn't gonna come live with them. I still had a roof over my head, that I'm still an independent person, I'm still running a company, but I realized, especially with my oldest, that he felt like I didn't trust him when he said, "Mom, don't." When I shut him out originally, he was the one that got the call about his dad. He was the one that was gonna take on the mantle of protect mom, and
Right.
he felt at that moment that he hadn't protected me and was
Oh,
angry that he hadn't, angry at himself, angry at me, And until I said, "Look, I'm sorry, I didn't listen to you. I didn't do this, but going forward, allow me to speak up, not to throw you guys under the bus, but to help other women that might be in this situation." We were victims of a financial crime. When you call it that rather than a scam or a, dating relationship scam or what
Right.
all those catfishing things, those words are so derogatory. Law enforcement understands fraud. They understand that. The banks understand fraud. They don't understand a scam.
Well, yeah, because I would say scam immediately signifies what's wrong with you that you got taken.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And
What's your role in that?
it's not a
Yeah.
scam. Yes, you did say hello. And when we talk with survivors today, the only thing they did wrong was say hello. Everything else is manipulated, calculated, and there's so much money being shipped across the pond.
We'll dive deeper into that right after this quick break.
Life is meant for exploring, and Sisterhood Travels is your invitation to rediscover you. Specializing in group travel for women 45 and over, we offer exciting trips to stunning destinations around the globe. Imagine tasting exotic foods, marveling at breathtaking landscapes, and connecting with incredible women who share your zest for life. Step into adventure, friendship, and joy at sisterhoodtravels.com. This is your time, your journey.
Picking right up where we left off, do we have a rough idea of the number universally that these crimes are generating?
We don't know, but the amount of money that they are receiving overseas is incredible, and that's where they get the technology and the training and all that from. And it's very hard to defend against unless they're here in the States. And I have been to federal court. It's hard because in the past, the criminals were overseas. Today, many of them have people here in the States. And
Oh,
if you get caught here in the States, you're going to get prosecuted here in the States. Well, when they get caught, they might get caught for money laundering. They might get caught for something, and it might be a year or two in jail. And that's not going to help a victim. That's not going to help anybody recover.
no.
And it's few and far between. It's very difficult to find them. Everybody has to speak up, though. That's the reason why you need to report. Only 3 out of 100 victims report.
I was going to ask you about that. I would imagine that shame and guilt would stop people from reporting it because they're so embarrassed and don't want anyone to know this happened to them.
Right. And if you go into a police department and they laugh at you, oh my gosh. So we try to prepare them to go in and say, you don't need their help to get the money back. You need their help to get an informational report number so that you have it on record. So that now you can go to your bankers and say, I've been victim of a crime. Here's my police report. In some states, you might be able to get rent assistance or some sort of therapy assistance. There might be some sort of victim advocate assistance somewhere, but you have to acknowledge that it happened. And that's very difficult for people to do if they've been blamed by others or shamed by others.
With so few people reporting it, do we have any semblance of accurate data on gender, age?
Oh, yeah, they can extrapolate from what's happening. But it is, men and women are the same. They're getting taken in the same ages. I mean, you have to understand that this is a very traumatic experience. There's PTSD involved in this. And so we encourage everybody to get with a trauma therapist afterwards to talk it out. And SCARS, actually, we partnered up with BetterHelp, and we give them 30 days of free assistance. You have to talk this out to someone that is willing to understand the trauma you've been through, because otherwise you shut down and you'll never talk.
I would imagine over the last 20, 30 years, with how prevalent this has become, that maybe there actually are trauma therapists that specialize in things that are related to victims of financial crimes.
I'm sure there are. There aren't enough. If you look at where domestic violence was 50 years ago, and someone walked into a police department with a black eye and the cops would go home and be nicer to your spouse. Today you walk in and the person gets arrested.
Right.
We are at a point where they were all those years ago. It will evolve. Back in the day, I couldn't find anything on the dating sites that said beware. I wanted to do a public service announcement, put it on every dating site for anybody over 50 that this happens and don't feel that, oh, it'll never happen to me.
Right.
Because anybody that feels that way, it is going to happen.
Right.
And it's
Right.
devastating. And when it happens, if you feel that way, that it's not going to happen to you, you will never own up and tell somebody that it did. We need to gently bring in the fraud investigators or someone from security and say, we've seen things similar to this. We want you to be aware. And if you could
Right.
slow it down, because we just need to get people to take a pause. It's like when grandma used to say, if something's too good to be true, sleep on it.
Yeah.
Sleep on it. Don't send money, the first time. See if the person gets angry. If the person gets angry, you don't want to be dating somebody that gets angry at you.
No.
Pause it. Put a
Right.
hold to it. I always say, get an objective buddy. Get a dating buddy. Because if you get involved in this in over 2 weeks, then you're stuck. You're in. You're in it till the end.
So what would the role of a dating buddy be, actually?
Well, actually, my best friend who tried and I kicked her out, someone that would look objectively at the stuff. Don't hide anything, because as soon as somebody starts asking you for money and you send it, you don't talk to anybody again. You don't tell your friends what's going on. And that's another thing. Listen to your friends. If you know your girlfriends or your guys' friends are dating and they're telling you all about this perfect person and all of a sudden they stop talking to you about it, they're hiding something.
That's great advice to know. Yeah.
Or just watch what's happening. I mean, I had a woman call me and she said, Deb, one of my older neighbors just came over and she's got her credit card in her hand and she wants me to help her take a picture of it so she can send it to her friend. I'm like, oh no, stop. Don't do that. Well, then the woman, obviously, because you got the criminal in your ear saying, well, I don't need a picture of it. Just give me the numbers.
Oh.
So she did that. And then my friend got with her and said, we need to call your credit card company. Credit card companies will not listen to me calling in about you because I'm not on your account.
That's right.
And children especially hate this because they see their parents' bank accounts and they're like, what can we do? I'm like, unless you're on the bank account, there's nothing you can do.
That's funny because I've since my husband passed away, I have had my daughter on my bank account.
I'm on my parents' account.
And I guarantee that kid has never gone in my bank accounts to even look. But if she suspected something, I know that she would, because she knows my habits. She knows what I do and what I do and do not spend. So I have a question for you. After this happened with him confessing to you and you went to the FBI, at what point did you decide to write your fabulous book?
That was after that weekend that I had gone with my girls down in Fort Lauderdale. I had gone in to talk a little bit better about my company. And after we had that luncheon, and they said, you have to tell your story, I crafted the story over the weekend about the woman behind the smile. And as we were presenting at the end of the weekend, I said, I invite you all to the world premiere of The Woman Behind the Smile. The room was silent. You could hear a pin drop.
Wow.
I'm like, when is that happening? How can we get tickets? I'm like, I just made that up. Like, no, you have to write your book.
Yeah.
And a friend of mine that was there actually was an associate editor or something for the Larry King show. And he called me into his office and he videotaped me the very first time I told my story. It was horrible, but I at least got it out. And he said, I'm going to send this to one of my friends. And he did. And the guy came back and he said, well, you need to write your book. And then, what was it like seeing the guy in person? And I'm thinking, you didn't hear my story. I didn't see the guy in person. Well, we could never send you to Oprah or whatever because they're going to ask you what it was like seeing the guy in person. I'm thinking, okay, I'm done.
Oh, yeah, because first of all, let me say, and I'm saying this for my listeners too, Life Reimagined with Stacey Ray does not do gotcha moments, okay? I am adamantly opposed to that. My role here is to help share these incredible stories, and the fact that you're willing to share yours, no gotcha moments here. But good for you to say, not doing
Well,
that.
I'm grateful for that because over the first few years when I was doing media things, and I do the media for Scars, I was up in New York on Dr. Oz, on Mel Robbins, on Tamron Hall, and some were better than others. I knew going into it that it was ratings week and that that's what they wanted it for. But for me, it was getting the word out that it could happen to anybody. Most victims, survivors that want to tell their story, we encourage them to hold off for at least a year, because you get one of those reporters that is so narcissistic and all they want to do is that gotcha moment or put you down as a victim or show how stupid were you. That hurts people. And we don't want
Absolutely.
people ever to get involved in that because that'll set back their recovery. Now, I've learned how to deflect and how to move them into what is really important. It's not important that I sent $1 million out. What's important is
Right.
how it happened and how I can recover and how I can move forward. And the message now is beware and be aware because it could happen to any of us. But I have to say, years ago, we used to say report to the FBI, ic3.gov. Many of the victims are like, that's a black hole, can't go anywhere, doesn't go anywhere. Do it anyway. Because when I was in Dallas for a federal court case, they had a forensic investigator that showed the trail of money and the emails and all this. And it was extraordinary how thorough they could get with the information that was reported. Again, you have to report it. They are not going to respond back to you, so don't get mad because the FBI didn't call you. The FTC is one that's helping out now. The Secret Service helps out now. There are better places to go, but you got to start local, even though you don't want to. Get that
Right.
report in, only on paper. If you need help, contact us at SCARS. We'll help you walk through it.
So I actually spent a lot of time on the SCARS website because I actually, even before I know of your personal story, I'm a little bit of a podcast junkie. So I listen to some of the scam related podcasts and true crime and things like that. But SCARS, tell me how you got involved with them and tell our listeners a little bit about them because the amount of incredible resources and information is just beyond, in my opinion.
The original site, the romancescamsnow.com, is the encyclopedia of relationship scams, not just dating, but any kind of relationship. I got involved because the Palm Beach posted a whole weekend 3-page article on my story years back. And the reporter gave me the name of Dr. Tim McGinnis, who's the founder of SCARS, and it's down in Miami. I tried to reach out to Tim for that article and we didn't connect until later on. And then I started the Woman Behind the Smile. And as I was doing the Woman Behind the Smile, I'm like, why am I recreating something that's already out there? And when I
Right.
saw the SCARS sites, I'm thinking, oh my gosh, this is everything that I needed to know. And so I contacted Tim and we became buds. And I've done a lot of podcasts with him and we've done some in-person things. We've done some interventions with people. He has been in the business for a lot of years and he was a tech guy. And he's seen this. And so when I got involved, it was more of what can I do to help the survivors? Because they don't relate necessarily to a 60-something-year-old white man. They resonated with me. They're the
Yeah.
60-year-old, 50-year-old woman this has happened after a spouse either died or divorced. And so I became kind of the face of SCARS. And then Tim and I did a lot of work together. We did a lot of webinars together. I had my own podcast, Stand Up and Speak Up. We interviewed victims without telling their names. We've interviewed folks who have been impersonated, especially military impersonation. Gripes me the most that these military guys' pictures are being taken.
I think we
I
forget that that's happening too, that all these fake
Oh,
pictures,
yeah.
those people are being victimized as well.
Right. And when the woman victim goes after the man whose picture that she fell in love with, stalks the family, starts calling the wife saying, your husband's having an affair with me. Now the victim has become a criminal because they're the
Correct.
stalker.
Yeah.
And we're like, don't do that's the vigilantism. Don't go after the person whose picture you see because that person's pictures have been stolen. So brings up the fact, privatize your social media. You don't, you and I are public people.
Right.
Most people don't have to have a public Facebook page.
Correct.
Don't put pictures of your grandchildren and your children and your dogs because that builds a story. How did I, fall in love with a family? Because I saw a picture of the dog, I saw a picture of the son, I saw, they pull pictures off of social media. And we don't need 1,000 friends. We talk to 15 maybe?
Right.
Be really careful.
Right. But we judge your value in life now by how many friends and connections you have. Apparently that's a thing.
Youth particularly I get in touch with young women who think they have to have these thousands and thousands and thousands of followers and friends, and I'm like, if you looked at my Instagram page, and I don't even really have one, it's
Yeah.
out there, but except for 3 real people, the rest are probably scammers. They're all criminals, and the profiles are fake. As soon as I see a profile on Facebook and it says widower, eh.
The latest thing is that if I write a review for a business or if I were to comment on something in a public group, almost inevitably I get multiple men, I use that term loosely, telling me how much, they write you this whole paragraph about how lovely you look and blah, blah, blah. And, oh, forgive me for doing this on a public forum. I would imagine that if they do that a million times today, they'll get some response.
Oh,
Someone
absolutely.
will,
It's casting a net. I mean, that's where the
yeah.
term phishing came from. They don't need $1 million from one person. They need $250 from a million people.
So when I was listening to the audiobook on scars, which, by the way, fantastic. One of the things I loved about the audiobook, not to give it away, but, for people who may really need to use that resource, the repeated reminders. This is not your fault and you are not alone,
Yeah.
right? One of the things, step 12, maybe, and it was talking about closure. What does closure look like when you've been a victim of a financial crime and it has completely devastated your life and possibly those around you? What does closure even look like?
Closure comes with, like you said, feeling like you're not alone. Being in the support group on a scars call, you can tell the person that just got notification they were scammed and a person 3 to 6 months later on. When you can sit there with someone else that has been through this and get it out. For me, it was telling the story the first time, getting the emotions of it out,
Right.
and then realizing like, oh, I'm not the only one this has happened to, and realizing that, okay, so a dollar is not as much as $1 million, but it was still a scam. It doesn't matter the dollar amount. It's the matter of this happened to you. You were manipulated. This is how. Learning the process is really huge because people don't understand. How could my mind do that? How could my heart do that? And it is not all, but a lot of it is psychological. And it's the body trying to protect you at some point. Understanding how it happened, how creative and how manipulative they are. The other thing is take your time and don't jump back into a relationship because the rebound, I've seen multiple people be taken multiple times because they think they learned the first time and they jump right back in hoping it's going to be something else and then it's another scam. Now, they laugh at me because I actually did jump back in fairly quickly. I did remarry 2 years later after dating for a couple of years. I mean, when I started dating after the scam reveal, it was in person. It was all in person. Someone had to live within 5 miles of my house, and I had to see them. I met my husband through a friend who's a matchmaker.
Debbie, let me ask you something. How did you allow yourself to trust again?
It was really interesting. The first date, we went out and we sat outside and talked for 4 hours, closed down the restaurant. The next date, which was a couple days later, I'd been on a date with somebody else, which was terrible. And I met him at Denny's and he said, Deb, I have something to tell you that my friends told me not to tell you.
Okay.
He'd been in recovery for 15 years or something. And I was like, you know what? You're the first man, other than my dad, who has been completely honest with me in 2 years. Now, here's my story. And I told him. He was such a sweetheart. He understood how important it was for me to speak up because in recovery, if you don't acknowledge what happened and keep talking about it and putting yourself around people that'll support you, then you don't win. You don't recover. Same in this. If you put yourself around people that have been through it, good people that give you good information, and you get rid of the anger, you get into acceptance and forgiveness of yourself, you will recover. That's what recovering success is for me. with these women is to see them see the light at the end of the tunnel, that you might have to change your expectations for retirement. Maybe you're going to have to work a little bit longer than you did before. Everybody has a misstep. You know, if you talk to anybody that is invested in the stock market, we've all lost money. We've lost it. You can't blame yourself for losing money. It happened. It's a learning process. I always say if you're going to fail, fail forward fast.
Yeah.
Get through it really fast and then figure out how you can reassess and move forward inch by inch.
It seems that there's really like multiple components to this. Of course, there's the financial side, but the emotional toll and the breakdown of relationships with people that you have loved and cared about would seem to me to be the harder recovery to go through. And how do you tell people to cope with the fact that maybe their children are not going to forgive them?
We do that quite often. And that's when we say find a trusted friend. And it might be family, it might not be. You can tell your children that you've been a victim to something. You don't have to tell them how much. You don't need to know that. But just say, look, I need your support in getting through this.
Right.
And then you don't have to talk to them much if you don't want to. You know,
And I need your support without judgment.
exactly. Because you will lose friends. I lost
Yeah.
friends, especially when I wrote the book. I
Oh,
lost people that I thought were my friends. You know,
really?
really.
Instead of cheering you on
Yep.
for,
Well, that's when you realize who your friends really are. And you might have friends for a reason and for a season. And I've gotten different friends over the years. I look back now, 12 years ago, I never would have told you that I would be in this position. But today, am I grateful? Yeah. Would I like that money back in the bank? Absolutely. But the people that I've met and the processes that I've gone through over the last few years made me a much better person. I don't want this to happen to anybody else, but that's
of
part of my
course,
reason for speaking up because I
of
don't want it to
course.
happen to somebody else. You know, we all go through things in our life that are good, bad, and ugly. And it's how do we make something bad into something very purposeful and helpful to someone else?
Well, I will tell you, you are the epitome of my tagline, which is turning life's detours into new destinations. Because you're right. If someone asked me, are you living the life right now that you dreamed you would? Not even a little bit.
Yeah.
Okay. But through all the challenges, traumas, tragedies, you do find a way to plug forward. We all have our own way of how we accomplish that. One of the things that I love also about scars, and I really do want you to tell our listeners how to really access those resources, is that everything is there. I mean, you even have photos of men and women who are being victimized because people have stolen their photos and things like that. The encyclopedia and the audiobook. It's such, you talk about a public service. I think it goes beyond being a public service. How did you end up being the chair of the organization?
It was just one of those things where I'd done so much work with the media, and Tim's like, you know what, this really has to be you leading it. Honestly, he does most, if not all, of the research. We have one of our victims who's on our board of directors from Mexico. She actually turned this into getting her master's degree in victimology, and she's
Oh my
one of the only
goodness.
ones in the country of Mexico to do this, where she used her experience now to say, okay, from a victim's point of view, this is how we interpret empty threats. And her name is Vianney Gonzalez, and Vianney is authoring a lot of the things with Tim. So it just became one of those from my passion to my purpose. I mean, I still have my company. I run my company
Yes.
in the mornings. I do that in the mornings. And then I just find such fulfillment in talking and working with the other victims to see them come through it. Like it's been 13 years for me. The ones that have been into it 3 weeks, they can't see an end. And I'm like, just hang in
Right.
there. You know, 3 months, 3 years, whatever, you will get there if you stick with it. If you stick with the program and treat yourself right first.
Yeah.
My greatest joy now is to see some of our survivors from a year or two ago who are now volunteers in leading support group, leading a phone call or a Zoom call.
And paying it
It's
forward.
great. Pay it forward. Most people get to a point where they just want to say, I'm done. I don't want to talk about it again. And they leave. but the ones that stick with it are the ones that are really making an impact. I have a life outside of this. Scars is not paid. None of us get paid.
Right.
It's a volunteer organization. For me, service is everything, and it gets your mind out of the woe is me.
The victim mentality.
Right. You
Yeah.
have to get away from that, or you'll never, like I said, you'll never recover if you stay in that I was taken mode or I lost everything. We all lose stuff over the years. It's like, how do we recover? I mean, I think it's Warren Buffett and all these guys that have made $1 gazillion, they've all lost their money, but you don't give up. Keep going forward.
We've kind of touched on it, and I'm curious what you and on behalf of Scars and all the people that you work with worldwide, what still needs to be done as far as not only bringing public awareness to this, but what do the police need to be doing? What laws need to change? How do we make this an interglobal effort?
It's happening slowly.
Mm-hmm.
It's hard to get people to understand unless it's happened to them. I always maintain that if the head of Match Group or one of those social media companies, if their mother was taken, this would be a whole different story.
Correct.
It would be personal. But the more this happens to people, the more it's affecting people in Washington. They understand that it's happening to everybody. And until we get some laws or until law enforcement understands it and kills the victim blame, and looks at it as fraud, then we aren't going to fix it. But little by little, it's the conversations, it's talking about it, it's people like you doing podcasts, helping get the word out and having people understand that we hope it doesn't happen to you, but it could happen to the person sitting beside you. What can we do
Correct.
to slow it down? What can we do to stop it? How can social media get those profiles off? We know they can. We know that they can do photo recognition. And the military guys who have, 3,000 profiles out there under the same pictures. Come on.
Meanwhile, they'll put well-meaning people who maybe said one word that someone complained about, and they'll put them in Facebook jail. But
Exactly.
the scammers are out there all over the place.
So that's why it doesn't do any good to really report something on Facebook, because you pull one down and 9 get put up. These companies are businesses and they want the bottom line. They want viewers, they want profiles, they want all this, but we need responsibility. Personal responsibility, corporate responsibility. When this is happening in such a big rate and so many people are being taken, there's a problem. And don't blame the victim that they were gullible and they did something. That'll get you ratings, but it doesn't solve the problem. How do we solve the problem? And it's international scope. We work with people all around the world, and I've worked with victims in Australia, New Zealand, the Philippines, you name it. What Dr. Tim is doing now, Tim is working with the university in Ghana. He's working with law enforcement in Nigeria. We've got to have them identify it first,
Right.
because this got to stop the scam artists. We got to close down those boilerplate places. There's so much involved in it, but the first is awareness, and it's not public service announcements. Think about it. People don't want to prevent, my business, prevent diabetes. They wait until they get the diagnosis and they're like, oh, now how can I cure it? We need computer red. How do you
Yeah.
protect yourself? How do you not, what do you look for in a phishing thing? When someone has been taken, then they're looking for, how do I get it money back? You might be looking for an investigator. You might be looking for someone else. Guess what? Those
Right.
are scammers too.
Those are scammers too.
If anybody asks you for money to help them support you in this, it's a scam. Find the reliable sources. I always go back to Scars. Go to the survivor school. Learn what it's all about before you jump into something else. We don't make a dime out of this. We would like some corporate sponsors so we can keep the program going. How can we help people move out of it and recover as fully as possible, whatever that recovery is? It may not be your bank account has a lot of money, but it may be you can go outside and you can talk to somebody, or you can appreciate the sun rising in the morning, or you might start a little betterment bank account, where you
Yeah.
systematically put $1 into an account, and talk about empowering to see a little bit of money over time
Grow.
grow.
Absolutely. How did humor and laughter get you through this?
You got to have it. I mean, I go to my dad. My dad, like I said, is a 95 retired dentist. He has got the funny bone that when it's gone, he's dead. You have to find humor in all of it. It's not putting anybody down. It's like when I get really nervous, I'll start to laugh. Just don't do it in church, right? But there's humor in all of it,
Yeah.
you know? If you can laugh at what happened later on, take seriously what happened and take seriously your own health, mental and physical, especially mental, you can get through this. You can be a survivor. You can be a thriver. You can be an advocate. Hang in there.
Absolutely. So, for the people who are listening to this podcast, what are the steps that you would advise them to take if A, they are actually looking for help, either for themselves or with someone they know, especially like maybe they think their parents might be susceptible to this or a sibling or what have you? What would you advise them to do?
If they've been a victim or a family member of a victim, you need to report it. First off, report it. In reporting, make sure that you've stopped all communication. We will not work with people that are still in communication with the scammers. We can't. Because if you're not willing to just put an end to it, you're never going to recover from it. You're going to keep getting sucked back in.
That makes perfect sense to me. Yeah.
Go to the survivor school. Learn what happened. It's brutal sometimes to look at this stuff and realize, oh my gosh, that is a cycle, and I did get sucked in here, and this is how they manipulated me, and the gaslighting and the love bombs and all this kind of stuff. Understand what those are, so that when you do tell your story, you can sound credible. Understand that if you've been in a romance relationship scam like this, you've been spending hours and hours online. You stop that, and you've got all this free time.
And now what do you do with it? Yeah.
Go into the school, spend that time doing that, spend time doing service to somebody else, spend time going out for a walk, getting some exercise, doing something for yourself.
Right.
Because otherwise that vacuum suck will pull another person in and you'll get taken again. So we have to fill up our time and understand really what is best for me now. Is it talking to my family? If that's not, then your family becomes the support group for a while.
Right.
Because the women on that support group that I help have all been through it. But give yourself the time to learn and to understand and then figure out how you can help somebody else, because there's no greater joy than being there for somebody else.
So, Deb, I guess what I'd really like to know is after, this incredible journey, as I said, from tragedy to triumph, where are you now with regard to your emotional and mental well-being and financial well-being? Where are you at?
I'm actually feel very blessed that I've gotten through this whole thing. I was able to remarry, and a wonderful man who, as my boys would say, will take care of me for life. I'm still working. I have my company. I'm still doing that every day. Emotionally, I'm much better. I've worked a lot on myself over the years, and that's part of the recovery program, is figuring out who you are and how this could have happened. I mean, I had a friend who was a social worker, and she looked at me and she goes, "You know what? If you would just open up and let me pull out from you certain things." And she realized that over time speaking with me, that I had this big hole in my heart. She said, "You felt like you hadn't been listened to for all those years we were married," which led to me being pulled into the story, because as I was talking or writing, he would say something and he would respond back that would fill up part of that hole. If you think of your heart as a piece of Swiss cheese that has all those holes in it, over time, my heart was being filled up by all the things that I was being told. And even though I got my heart ripped out from underneath me, at the end, all those spots that were empty had been filled. And I'm grateful for that. I'm, grateful that he revealed himself in person. I don't ever want anybody to have to go through that. But for me, that was a healing spot, because that gave me closure to the immediate danger I was
Yeah.
in financially. Financially, I've recovered, but I haven't. I obviously got none of my investments back, and I had a really good accountant. I've been fortunate that I've recovered from that. I'm very fortunate that I have a very supportive family. My kids and I have a completely different relationship, but one of trust and honesty and adult talking to adult, not adult talking to children.
That is fabulous.
It's huge. So
Yeah.
I'm at a really good spot in my life, and I think, speaking of this and speaking of scars, it builds me from the inside out. And that's really, really important. I don't particularly care what people say about what happened anymore. I don't look at any reviews because I know what I'm doing is important to that one. It's to the one person that needs to hear my story. And I appreciate your support in that too, because we all do something that we regret. And it's part of our life's quilt, the way I put it. We just got to move on. And I've been very fortunate to have been able to move forward and give a little bit of light to other people and say, you can do it. You can do it too. And for that, I'm really grateful.
And I admire you so much for your strength and your willingness to share. And forever, I'm going to be grateful for this conversation. The work that you're doing for others around the globe is nothing short of spectacular. I hope that we do justice to this and that many, many people will learn from the sharing. If there is anything that we as an organization can do to help, we will. And
Well, I just appreciate you and the time that we've spent. And if anybody is out there as a victim or a victim's family, they can write to me at Debbie at the woman behind the smile. I do respond personally to victim stories, and I will steer you towards scars because I've found for myself and for
right.
others that that is the best thing to do. It's again the Society of Citizens Against Relationship Scams. I have my own website called The Woman Behind the Smile. I put much of my story and the things that I've done over the last 10 years there, but I also have links to the scars pages.
You also have some great videos on there.
There are,
Yeah,
there are, and it's fun
yeah,
because when I did my podcast, Stand Up and Speak Up, even though I interviewed a lot of people, everybody has a story, and it's not just a relationship scam; it's a story, and I found it so incredible listening to the stories that people have that they didn't want to talk about
yeah,
until they did.
right.
And it is transformative to hear someone's story.
It is. And, my thought is, and I bet you feel the same way, if even one person feels like they've been seen or heard or understood, and this helps them take even a tiny step forward in reimagining their life or transforming their life, then it's a success. Yes?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And I applaud you for what you're doing because it takes each one of us to tell our stories to change the world. And together we're going to do it together. So I appreciate you.
If you liked this show with Debbie, please be sure to like us, follow us, subscribe to us, give us a review, because it really helps grow our podcast.